It has been said that great coaches don't avoid conflict, they guide their teams through it, teaching that resolution builds unity, not division. Let's talk about coaching through conflict on today's episode of the Playing with a Purpose podcast. All right, welcome to the Playing with Purpose podcast, where we explore topics related to the moral development of collegiate athletes and young people as it relates to character, responsibility, and purpose. I'm your host, Matt Barker, and today I'm excited to have Freed-Hardeman Head Baseball Coach, Mr. Jess Trask, with me on today's episode. Jess, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks, Matt. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, this is the first time we were talking before the podcast. It's the first time you've been on the podcast, first time you've been up in the studio where we record here. So tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, some background information for those that might not know who you are.
Yeah, for sure. So came down here to Freed-Hardeman as a graduate assistant in 2015. I spent 2 years under Coach Estes as a graduate assistant. Went out to Kansas and worked with Jeremy Kennedy at Bethany College for a year, and then was fortunate enough to be able to come back and be the assistant coach for Coach Estes for a handful of years. And then when he moved into that athletic director role, stepped in as the head coach and have been in that position since. So prior to coming down here in 2015, I spent some time at a Lewis and Clark Community College as an academic advisor and a baseball coach. That's what I did out of college. In school, I was at UT Martin for 3 years, and I was at a community college for 2. So I have a pretty decent background when it comes to just being around different programs, different levels, different coaches, different leadership styles, methods, and things like that. So been doing this for almost 17 years now, and it's just been fortunate enough to be around really, really good leaders and strong leaders throughout my tenure with my coaching profession. So
yeah, you came into Freed-Hardeman when I was still working in athletics. You were as an assistant coach for Coach Estes, as you mentioned, who is now the athletic director. One of the reasons I wanted to have you come on is because baseball is a little bit unique, where probably of all the teams at Freed-Hardeman, maybe with the exception of soccer, you have probably the largest roster of players. Yeah. And so the topic today is coaching through conflict. And I would think with a roster of about 50 plus guys on your team, there's inevitably going to be some conflict between players, between, whatever it is throughout the season. There's some ups and downs, and there's probably some times where conflict occurs, and probably have to address those things from time to time. Absolutely. So I thought you'd be a good one to talk about kind of some ways that you can use conflict maybe as a motivation to get together as a team, maybe to think about things a little bit differently, to come together as a team. Maybe not always conflict isn't a negative thing. It can be used to kind of improve things as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So I thought you'd be a good one to come on and talk about that. So starting off here, how would you define your philosophy for when it comes to handling conflict when it inevitably will happen?
And that's exactly right. Inevitably, it will happen. And so my philosophy on that is transparency, honesty, communication, and just being really open with the fact that when conflict does arise, let's address it. Let's talk about it. And I really don't think that having a black and white approach to a lot of the conflicts that we deal with is good. I try to take each situation, separate the person from perhaps the behavior, and regardless of what that person has done or their character, that it's this specific behavior that we need to jump into and address at that time. So that it can't just be cut and dry all the time. Sometimes there's going to be some gray area, and you're just going to have some feel and utilize that communication, the honesty, and the transparency as much as possible with everyone, the team, the coaching staff, and then the player who has that issue.
Absolutely, yeah. So it does come down to relationships. You got to kind of know who your players are to know the best way to handle that. Talked with Coach Estes about that too, and he coached baseball. He's like, there's some players, if I went to the mound to talk to them, had to be a little more gentle. Sometimes I had to get in their face a little bit, depending on how the players would respond to that. So regardless of the conflict, you kind of have to know who the players are to know the best way to maybe address that conflict. Is there any maybe particular strategies maybe that you use to get to know players, to know kind of how to address that? Is there some sort of, maybe not something that fits every player, but is there a way that you get to know them so you do know maybe how to address those things?
I think a lot of that starts in the recruiting process, so that the relationship that you develop while they're still in high school or at a different school. And then if you have some, you speak on that big roster, there's some situations where I have no communication with a guy prior to him coming to campus. So my relationship with him will be different than, say, a Coach McCall or a Coach Langford who did a lot of that recruiting process up front. So that goes back to that communication with our coaching staff. So say if I don't have a background with a player, it's like, well, what makes this guy tick? And just coaching our coaches to try to figure out some of those tendencies from our guys, and then just observing and utilizing other teammates, and it's like, hey, what's going on with Johnny today? Or just kind of getting some background on with some guys you do maybe who've been in the program a little bit longer, utilize them as it's like, hey, who is this guy? They see him all the time. They with class, dorm, lunch, they're together way more than we are, so I can utilize the upperclassmen or some teammates to help with developing and growing some of those relationships with those other guys as well.
Yeah. I had a question that I was going to ask you a little bit later on, but since you touched on it, let's go ahead and touch on that. Team leadership. Every team has certain leaders. Maybe there are some upperclassmen. Maybe they're just some that are really good at just leading their teammates. Yeah. So how do you maybe utilize some of those, and maybe what are some things you do to get them involved in helping you? A lot of times players see things maybe more than the coaches do because they're with the guys a lot more in the dorm or whatever it is. So what are some things maybe you do to allow them to kind of take on some of those things to help the coaches out in figuring out maybe how to resolve a conflict between the players or something like that?
Yeah, so this year we're trying something new. We tried it back in, I want to say 2019, and we did a little bit with it, and it was a good start little back there. We brought that back this year, and it's boat crew leaders or accountability pods. And so the coaching staff and myself this summer, we picked 12 guys to lead 6 different groups. So there's going to be 2 leaders per boat crew accountability pod. And these are guys that it's not just seniors that are the boat crew leaders, a couple sophomores in there. It's just guys that have a good work ethic, have shown responsibility, have just shown tendencies of leadership. Maybe they haven't been in the position yet. This is their first opportunity, perhaps. But they have shown tendencies last year to, hey, they can help us with these situations that arise. So they have their individual pods, about 8 to 10 other teammates on there in each group, and they'll communicate with each member twice a week, and then they'll have a meeting once a week. And then we're just going to, at the beginning, hopefully just find some red flags and get some stuff from them because I feel like teammates will open up and discuss some maybe vulnerabilities or some problems they're having from the jump with their teammates, more so than they're just going to come and talk with a coach about things. They don't want to be as vulnerable or show weakness with the coaching staff, I've learned, but they'll do that with their teammates, and then their teammates, can come and confide in us, and we can kind of work around that together. So we're fairly new with this. It's only been a couple weeks, but I really have appreciated how our guys have taken this we've just given them a little bit of instructions. Here's some expectations we want to see, but we just want to see this organically come together, and they kind of take ownership in what their pod's going to look like. They're doing meetings, they're checking in with text, they're eating lunch together. It's just been pretty cool this past few weeks since school started back up, just seeing where this is going. And I'm looking forward to having weekly meetings with the leaders just to keep this thing rolling, because I think these guys are really, really going to be helpful with just giving us some maybe red flags up front. We can be proactive and hopefully limit some of the maybe mistakes or conflict that will
maybe
arise.
Catch it on the forefront. And as you get into the season, when we get into the spring, kind of into fall, I could see that definitely being something where tensions start rising a little more. When the season starts, you got a lot more you're trying to juggle than maybe in preseason. So I could definitely see that. It sounds like a really, really good program. I think that'd be really good. The next couple questions kind of go together, and you already mentioned a couple of these. Communication obviously is a big thing in addressing conflict, but I think another one is just kind of keeping everybody on the same wavelength as far as the mission of the team. What is our overall goals? How do you balance maybe addressing some conflicts that come up while keeping them engaged in talking about it, communicating, but also keeping them in the same mission of what the team's about?
Sure. With that, at the end of the day, everyone is striving to have a successful baseball program. So 1 through 60 of our team, they all will have a certain role. They'll all have individual identity within that, but everyone wants it appears everyone wants what's best for the Freed-Hardeman baseball team and having success. And so any type of conflict that arises, is a deterrent or a distraction, because if I'm worried about my teammate over here, he's not pulling his weight, then all of a sudden my focus isn't on just getting the best I can. Now I'm worried about him as well, and it's almost taking away from the type of performance I can do, because I'm worried about some teammates. Are they doing enough to help us be successful? So our pillars and what we discuss a lot about is responsibility, commitment, discipline, and pride. And so like we have to talk to our leaders and our guys that you have the burden and the responsibility to take care of these other guys and to pull them with you. And that, I think, in life, once they get outside of the college and they get into their career and have families and everything, they're going to start understanding that it's like, I can't just be focused on myself and be successful. I have other things that I have to take care of, other responsibilities, other commitments that I need to put just as much time, focus, energy, and priority into, but that can't deter and take away from my own individual goals. So just teaching them early, and hopefully the college age years, teaching them early that they can continue to strive individually, but also carry the burdens of others, help others, work together on that, and flourish in the long run.
Yeah.
So.
That's great. I love that. And so when we think about, you mentioned you've coached over 17 years now, so you've been doing this a while. There might be some young coaches listening to this podcast. So maybe what are some things that have your coaching style, maybe some things that have evolved on how you've handled conflict in the past and maybe how you handle it now? And maybe what's some advice you would give to a younger coach that's still trying to figure out the best way to handle conflict, maybe resolve it within a team? Maybe what are some things you learned with that?
Yeah, I think at first I was probably very demanding and almost aggressive, because that's the type of player I was. I didn't need a lot of external motivation. Like a lot of mine was intrinsic or internal. And so like if a coach were to holler at me and get on me, it's like I understood that really wasn't the motivator. Or if I had to go run for something, like I could just get through the running, I'd be fine. Yeah. It was like my own thoughts were, I was just very internal with that stuff. You know what I mean? Yeah. Not a lot of outside factors influenced me very much. So when I get into coaching, I didn't necessarily have the empathy. I didn't necessarily have just the communication skills. Still not fantastic. That's a constant thing you got to work on, of course. But it's just understanding that everyone's different, everyone's motivated differently, and just being empathetic that they're more than a baseball player.
Yeah.
They're a human being, they're a person. And for a good chunk of that early part, it was just like, go, go, go. I'm not worried about the problems you're having outside. Yeah. It's practice time. Like we need, and just being a little bit more accepting. And I think having kids of my own has helped me with that. But just being accepting that this isn't life and death. We're not at war. I don't need to be a military general.
Yeah.
I need to be a baseball coach, and relationship, and the term, what is it, transactional over transformational? I was probably a little transactional, trying to work for that transformational of really getting to know the player and not just making it so life or death on this baseball game. So yeah. I know that's kind of a windy road of explanation of how it is, but it's just, I felt like I was very demanding and didn't really just know empathy, you know, and I have grown to try to understand and have some grace for these guys.
How difficult is it to build those relationships when rosters seem to turn over quite a bit every year, especially now with different programs with the transfer portal, and you have certain people graduate and bringing other players in? How difficult is that to build those relationships, to know kind of how to best handle conflict with different players? How difficult can that be?
It can be challenging because when it takes some time. I mean, you have a big team and you have a lot of things going on, and it's hard just to have those one-on-one conversations daily that it would take to get to know somebody really well. But the utilization of your assistant coaches, our grad assistants, our student managers, just the communications with them, you get to know some guys a little bit better because they have some run-ins and some conversations with guys. So you can pick up off of just utilizing your resources around you. But yeah, you really start to get to know a guy, you develop a relationship, and then either they hit a transfer portal or they decide that this isn't for them, or it can be difficult, but it's just, you need to be intentional and you need to just try to stack days together where you're developing, because you don't know how much time you're going to have with said player.
Right. We talk a lot in the communication classes I teach about conflict. We talk about this a lot because it's a part of everyday life. And one of the things we talk about a lot is not all conflict is bad. Conflict is going to happen regardless. It's all in how you handle it.
Sure.
And so when we think about conflict being this, a lot of times we have this negative connotation associated with it, but a lot of times conflict can really help a team and strengthen it, or just individual relationships. If you have a conflict and you address it, you learn better how to maybe handle that in the future.
Right.
So
how do you respond?
Yeah, how you respond to it, and if you respond in a good way, then your relationship with your players, with whoever it is that you're in a relationship with, is going to be strengthened because you've better able to figure out how to handle that in the future. So, is there a time maybe in your coaching career where you saw a conflict occur, whether between maybe a disagreement between coaches or disagreement between a coach and a player, or just players themselves kind of having a conflict with each other, where you saw the team maybe come together as a result of it, and maybe it was a positive thing?
Yeah, actually, something that happened last year early. We had two upperclassmen. One was a pitcher, one was a position player. We're going through a drill with some pick plays that second, just some timing reads that we do. And one of the pitchers was kind of just going through the motions, going through it a little bit slower, and our position guy was really challenging them and causing some chaos inside of this drill. And maybe that wouldn't happen in a game, but also everything happens in a game. Weird things happen all the time. So it's like this position guy was really pressing on this pitcher to kind of get him out of his comfort zone, to get into this drill a little bit more. And these two guys, they got after it. And at first it was like kind of crickets from the team, but then we come together and we get an opportunity to, here's why this player was doing this. Our position, like he was doing it to try to challenge you and test you and get the most out of you. It wasn't malicious. It was just he was trying to push the envelope and see your limits on that. And you failed at how you responded. We thought body language was pretty bad there, and we all had a chance to kind of just come together, talk about it. And then that drill set from then on out was excellent. That practice finished really, really excellent. And that could have went one or two ways. Like, I feel like if we just sit there and just let the crickets, and then it's like, okay, next guy up. We don't take that moment to just, hey, let's talk about this. I don't know what would have happened. Maybe we would have just moved on and we would have come back the next day, et cetera. But I felt like that was just a really good moment, and that kind of shifted the way that drill went. In future drills, it's just, that was now the normal, like, hey, if a guy's going to test you and challenge you and maybe do some crazy things on the base paths or things like that that you might not see in a game, like, take that as an opportunity to go challenge him back and, try to work through the drill the best you can. And so that was just one moment last year that I felt like was really, really good. And to your point when you're talking about just making it into a positive, I really do think everything comes down to just how do we respond? And me as a leader and the coach of the team and our assistant coaches, Coach McCall and Coach Langford, we need to do that with consistency.
Yeah.
And really, really strive to not get too high with the highs or low with the lows. So if a moment like that were to pop up and then I'm yelling at both players, we could go crazy on that. If I just leave it be in the low, we could go crazy on that as well. So just having some consistency when it comes to how you respond to these different situations that pop up. Yeah,
it kind of goes along with another question I was going to ask you. How do you kind of stay composed? And kind of made me think of another question. I'm throwing some at you here, so I maybe didn't prepare you for these.
No
but recent in the headlines with the Astros playing the Yankees, you see this where the Framber Valdez hits the catcher, and a lot of people are saying it's intentional.
Yeah.
A little bit of conflict there. The pitch before, it was where, he's trying to get him to step off. He doesn't, throws a pitch, grand slam. And then the next pitch, they say they got crossed up, but it was like Framber Valdez throws it, hits him right in the chest, and you can tell the catcher was just like, dude, like, what's going on? And Framber Valdez doesn't say sorry. He just turns around. A little bit of conflict there. The kind of the coach, the way they addressed it, didn't really say one thing or another. So as a coach, if you have a situation like that where you can kind of sense that maybe there's some hostility between a pitcher and a catcher, or just something between teammates, that how would you address that conflict, and maybe how would you do that to where you stay composed and try to help the team grow from it?
Well, in that situation, it's probably one of those where where it's like, hey, we can't have a therapy session out on the mound.
Right.
With
Yeah.
these
You
guys,
got to
right?
finish the game.
The umpire's going to come out and he's going to say, hey, that's enough. You guys, we got to get back to gameplay. So it's like, hey, guys, let's take a breath. Let's get through this.
Yeah.
And then we need to, when they get into the dugout, that's what the concern is, not getting the idea for what we're going to go attack on the next inning or that. It's like, hey, what's going on, boys? You know what I mean? And then just letting them vent or get their frustrations out at why. And then it's like, okay, guys, we need to just take a breath here, and just try to get their feet back on the ground and get them thinking a little bit clearer, because in the heart of competition, man, like you could go just glazed over with rage, and trying to stay out of that moment as much as possible is important. And clearly those two guys, they just let their egos and tempers flare a little bit on them. You know?
It was kind of interesting to see when I was watching. I was like, it's not a great look,
Right.
And so there's a lot of times you see that with teams where, there's just some conflict going on there. But how do you maybe create, you talked about open communication, addressing issues early, I think is important, like you mentioned. How do you maybe instill a culture where healthy confrontation and allowing players to kind of voice their opinion on things? How do you kind of make that the culture of a team? And how do you maybe encourage players to be open to doing that and maybe addressing those things?
Definitely. I think that starts with, if players suggest stuff or have ideas, empower them by doing it. Even like whether you think it's a good idea or whether you think this or that, like if you want them to have a voice and you want them to be comfortable being transparent, open, and honest, if they make a suggestion, you need to either have a very good explanation of why we're not going to go with that, or it's, let's give this a shot. Let's see that. And that just gives them a feel of ownership and a feel of, hey, when I say something, we make some moves or we have some changes, so I can feel more comfortable about going to that. But if every time somebody comes to me with something and I just shoot it down and do my own thing, that's going to, I think, really hurt trust, because it's like, well, coach doesn't even trust me. Why would I trust him?
Right.
I think that hurts respect. Coach doesn't respect any of my opinions or any of my thoughts. So it's like when they recommend stuff, give it a shot. You know what I mean? And then that just puts the ball in their court of, then all of a sudden, if things could go haywire from there, they have to kind of take some ownership and finding some solutions on their own. And I was like, I'm not always there just to save them on that.
Yeah, that's great advice. And letting them kind of take a little bit of accountability with it. And if something fails, then they can say, that was my idea, and how can we figure out a way to maybe, do this better the next time. But at least they gave me the opportunity, just having that opportunity.
And that's huge for these 18 to 22 year olds. Just, we want them to be good leaders. And this is something that maybe would have helped me in my playing days. It was the opportunities to be leaders at that age. Like maybe I didn't have as many as I could. So I kind of strive to let's put this on these guys. So, I mean, we're only a few years away from them being out in the workforce and hopefully having people work for them, or they're going to have other bosses, so it's like giving them opportunities to lead and not just succeed, but also fail. I think failure is super important for these guys so they can understand how to come out of that, how to find solutions off of that, and how not just be, oh, well, my ideas aren't any good. Well, that one wasn't, but here's some things we're going to make a change on, and we're going to give this a go. Just giving them that power to lead.
Yeah. If you had to give one lesson about conflict you wish every coach or leader understood, and this might be a good time to kind of tell any other things maybe we didn't get to that a lot of that lesson about conflict you wish every leader or coach understood. Could be some of the things we've already touched on, communication, all that. Anything else that we didn't cover? I
think that so as an assistant, there would be a lot of times where I would see conflict, and then how a leader, another coach I was with, or players or whatever, and how they dealt with that, and then kind of thinking like, oh, I could have done that better, or I could have.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you get put into that seat, and now you start really going back and being like, maybe I will. Maybe I didn't need to think so I could. What's the problem there? Because it's like these things hit, depending on your role, they hit a little bit different at times. Assistants don't maybe see the full picture. Players don't never usually see the full picture. Sometimes head coaches don't see the full picture, but it's just, don't be so quick to judge other people leading, and don't be so, have empathy with them from the jump. And that was something I felt like early in my career, I just felt like I could do things a little bit better. Now I'm starting to see that that's not always as easy as I thought it would be.
Yeah,
you know?
It's like when you're watching a game from your house living room, and you're like, we should have done this, and then like it's always easier when you're on the outside looking in.
Hindsight's 20/20.
Oh man, yeah, that's true with any part of life, even outside of sports. Having that empathy for other people, I think, is important.
It's crucial for us. It's just the empathy factor, and for me, just I strive every day to just get a little bit better, because I feel like I was starting at a zero, and I just working every day to just be more empathetic and to have understanding. But also on top of that, like when you're working, coaches just so much value in the people around you, and having strong assistants, strong leaders, like in utilizing them. That's just because conflict is going to be steady. So have some consistency, have good communication with your assistants and with your leaders, and just really strive to take each decision or situation as that's the only one we're worried about today. Here's all of our standards. Here's how this falls. Let's not take any of the baggage from the other stuff. Let's just worry about this decision. Let's try to make it, or worry about this situation, make a good decision, and then let's go to the next one. Like we can't just blanket approach all of our conflict resolution.
Well, Jess, I really appreciate you coming on. This has been a great conversation about something that's not always talked about, and it's people that don't a lot of times like to talk about conflicts. So really appreciate you coming on, and good luck with the upcoming season.
Perfect. Well, good deal. Thank you for having me, Matt. It's been a pleasure.
All right, thanks for joining us for this episode of the Playing with a Purpose podcast. Special thanks again to Jess Trask for being my guest this week. Be sure to listen to this episode and future episodes on Spotify or anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also catch the Playing with a Purpose podcast on the Freed-Hardeman Athletics Champions of Character website at gofhulions.com/champions of character, and on the NAIA Champions of Character website at naia.org/champions of character. Join me for our next episode as I talk with Estes Church of Christ Youth Minister Mr. Seth Stewart on the topic of the company you keep. And remember, winning isn't just about the scoreboard, it's about the character we build along the way. We'll see you next time on the Playing with the Purpose podcast.